There we go. So I thought, why start these meetings and give for granted that people know who I am and why am I doing this? So I just wanted to again welcome you all, introduce myself. So I'm Sara. I'm currently the OLS community and training lead. And I realized the creation behind all of this webinar series was celebrating people's projects, people pathways along or from our OLS programs, and also what happened afterwards, whether they're working in the kickoff projects or not. And I think I just wanted also to share my pathway because I was an OLS mentee myself, as you can see, like 4 years ago. So my background is on molecular biology. I've done a whole master's, PhD, postdoc during 7 years in pain biology. And in my last years of research is where I came across OLS. I participated in one of their first OLS Open Seats training programs. And since there is just history, I just became obsessed with open science, with communities, with supporting each other. And from OLS mentee, then I became a mentor. I actually am so proud of having here my first mentees in the program, Nina Noswati. And then together with OLS, Tunway, other communities, I started this journey. Um, I guess one thing that opened the doors for me was when I brought actually a version of Open Seats of the OLS training program into my own research into King's College London. From there, we just decided why not keep working with OLS? Why not keep supporting the amazing work that this organization does? And yeah, I guess I'm just like full of pride, and that's why I want to share all of these beautiful people and all of these beautiful projects with all of you. So that's it. Without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Anne. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves because, you guys know yourselves better and I'll be doing a terrible job. So yes, Anne, I'm handing over to you for the presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, hi everyone. So lovely to be here. So lovely to see familiar faces. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. I feel like after years and years of working on the screen, you would think that you wouldn't have that like little bit of fear of, can you hear me? Can you see me? It will never stop, I think. Um, yeah, I just figured I'd made these slides really just to like zoom through things. And it's interesting. It was an opportunity, I think, through Sarah and through this presentation to really kind of like try to draw threads. Like, what are the seeds that eventually have like fruited in other areas of my life? What were seeds that I didn't really know were seeds at the time? And what I find so interesting about the like OLS open seeds kind of universe or ecosystem is that it kind of feels like if we really want to take this garden metaphor really far, it feels kind of like it's like fertilizer for your ideas, but also for your network, for things you would never even expect. And that's been really the like great privilege of being a part of this broader community, as I've like grown in different directions because of it. And so, really, really briefly, I'm also going to do what Sarah did: is introduce myself. I feel like used to have a straightforward introduction when I was a community manager, but now I am in the weeds of new introductions and new ways of thinking about myself too, which is exciting but also scary. Um, I'm a researcher, facilitator, and artist. I was most recently the community manager of the Turing Way project, a close ally, of course, of the Open Seeds project. I've been in and around like different projects and different communities of what I call the open ecosystem for the past 5 years as a contributor, 10 years as a participant and active lurker. Um, and really, this kind of timeline here speaks to how, one, non-linear it really has been, but also how I've kind of turned to each practices in response to the other. And I think, again, that's kind of a theme that might come through in what I'm talking about a career progression might look like, at least from my perspective. Is that I began very much as a kind of anthropologist, a social science researcher, really interested in the politics of these technologies, But then as I really wanted to be able to change them, to be, a part of culture change, communities was really how I found that to be possible, where I was able to, as a community manager, learn about projects and liberatory forms of technology and organizing together that really inspired me and made me realize that actually researchers' tools are one part of it, but what about the communities actually change how and what we research, how and what we organized, all of these elements that I think are just imbued into how I exist online now. And then finally, I kind of turned to media art over the past couple of years, especially as in an effort to like find new ways of communicating outside of classical forms. In many ways, kind of applying the same principles of like community work and applying them to other forms of communication. Um, yeah, just an example of some of the groups that I've been a part of. If you see things that you don't recognize or see things that you do, I'm happy to send over more information too. Maybe you'll plant a seed in you. um, in any case, I thought I'd kind of like flag a couple of seeds here, maybe for my first lesson that I learned from OLS, but I think that OLS kind of helped me to be able to reflect on. One was that these seeds take a long time to come to fruition. You can't really predict when or how they might. Like when I was first reflecting on like I'm working on this fellowship for the Software Sustainability Institute this year around, connecting computational art and sustainable software communities. And I was like, when was the first time I started thinking about this connection? And it was all the way back in 2013 when I was working on a project or a festival that had very similar topics, actually. And it was that incident that was more than a decade ago that planted a seed for something that came to fruition, you know, again in 2020, 2026. A similar experience in 2015 when I was a part of mapping projects that eventually influenced how I approach these same projects as a researcher in 2020. In 2017, I think I actually forgot to change this point, but this is around looking at sustainable development, sustainable communities, and what community-led work looked like. And again, that really came into fruition in 2022 when I became a community manager. And again, you kind of see this like back and forth between seeds of ideas that you're exposed to at the time that you're not actually sure um, when they might like influence your path, the direction that you're interested in. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to share maybe the first kind of seed for me was really like that every experience is a kind of seed. And I think if I'm reflecting back on my OLS experience, which I was really thrown into, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. In early 2022, through Malvika, my line manager and supervisor at the time, who had already proposed a project around governance for the Turing White project. Like the project had grown so much over the course of the past 3 years. Governance was really on the mind. She'd proposed this project to OLS. And when I joined the team, it was like, okay, you're going to work on this project too. Welcome to OLS. And I was like, what is OLS? And like, what do you mean by governance? And all these kinds of things. I was like thrown into the deep end. Um, and that was a seed that honestly, 3 years later, I realized that there were things that I was exposed to then that I thought I understood at the time, but I actually didn't understand until years later. And so, really, that was the first lesson. You never really know what direction it's going to take you, and maybe just like be open to all of it. I think that's one of the beautiful things about, I think, the like chaos and interestingness that you get exposed to through programs like this. Um, yeah, and maybe a little bit more about my OLS experience itself. So I was a part of a project called Exploring Governance Models for Open Science Communities as per their maturity stage. And so it was really kind of developing a schematic to be able to understand governance on kind of like an ecosystems level of how people are thinking about it, talking about it. What models were they developing? What like concrete practices would that translate into? And a big part of that was one, like discussions that Malvika and I would have as collaborators that I think was one, an exercise in building trust between us. So again, if you're a part of like any collaborative project, as so many OS and Open Seeds projects are, I think at the time, I remember being like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Like, what am I doing? What is it? years later that it was the act of all of these conversations that I would have with her, but also then all of these interviews that we would do with folks like across all of these different projects, to understand the work that they were doing, that like it played two roles actually. One was the topic, one was to learn about governance, but the second was to build trust. And actually, the second one is more important. Um, and I think the reason why I say that is because I think, especially in times like now, when so many of the tools and technologies that we use, or like breakdown of the social fabric, we could talk about that another time. Um, I think instances where you can build trust, where a topic is a vehicle for building trust to be able to have sustained collaborations in the future, especially when you want to build a better research ecosystem or you want to build better technology, that is actually the vehicle through which that happens. And the fact that the Open Seeds team creates this like container through which like trust is made more possible or made easier, I think is super valuable and actually really rare. Because so oftentimes you're actually thrown into environments where the value might be actually be that of competition or of achievement or of a concrete objective above all, when in fact what actually gets things done is like trusted social fabric that enables you to actually do things together. um yeah, and so really that kind of comes to mind is that the second lesson, which is that like things take a long time to come to fruition, and like be patient with how much time it takes, for you to process or to understand kind of what you're learning about. I remember there were so many lectures that I participated in when I was a part of the Open Seeds program that I was like, I had no idea that that was a thing, or I didn't know about this, or I didn't know about this. Um, I think I didn't really actually know how to take advantage of any of those resources or like process it because I was like cognitively overloaded by how many things that I was learning, that I thought I was dropping everything, and I was kind of overwhelmed by how much I thought that I was dropping when in reality it just takes time. And so, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have three rounded lessons. I only have these two, but but I did want to share perhaps something that better encapsulates everything that I just said, which is a book that I return to all the time, by a German poet named Rilke, from his Letters to a Young Poet, which is a series of letters that he wrote to a poet that was younger than him. And he was 26 at the time. So, again, take it with a grain of salt. Old in those times, not so old now. Um, yeah, which is really just to kind of like live the questions now. And if you like live those questions, then maybe you'll eventually find your way into the answer. And as someone that feels like I'm living those questions now myself, where I started my own company in the past year, I started freelancing for the first time, and I found myself distributed across so many different environments and communities again. And I'm like, my career, my trajectory doesn't make sense anymore in a traditional way. And when I think about, all of the things that kind of got me to this point, I'm like, well, actually, maybe just the more I continue to live those questions, it will eventually make sense. But maybe it just takes a long time for it to do so. And I look at Rilke saying this, and I'm like, all right, I think it's okay. I think we're all of us that want to do this kind of liberatory type of work, all kind of mucking around to see what sticks. And that's pretty much it. Thanks. These are all screenshots from my desktop that I turned into a slide deck.
Oh, love it. Thank you so much. And that was fantastic. So inspirational as always. Thank you so much. If you guys have any question for Anne or any comment, please just drop them for now in the shared document, and we'll just go over them after the next presentation, so we can have a bit of a discussion together, okay? So next we have Nina and Swati. I am particularly proud of them too. What can I say? They were my first mentees in OLS, my first guinea pigs in my mentoring journey. I have nothing but great memories from them. And yeah, I'm very excited to see just how everything is going with Agape and with your life. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Sarah. So, rather than talking about me personally and probably Ashwati about her, we will talk about Agape or Agape, which is open science community we established, and maybe talk a bit about our journey and what it brought us. It won't be so beautifully eloquent and metaphoric. We won't talk about open seats, but rather the main topic will be a collaboration. So this all started during lockdown COVID around 2021, 2022, where a lot of international PhD students met during this course funded by Horizon 2020 named Opening Your Research to Collaborative Futures, aka Opening Doors. And a huge part of this course was actually open science element. And for the assignment, which was supposed to be individual, we rather asked if we could work on this collaborative effort and develop this introductory course to open science for early career researchers because we felt what we learned was very relevant and we wanted to share it with other PhD students, postdocs, librarians, and so on. So yeah, it was quite a lot of effort, as you mentioned. It took much longer than expected, but we really enjoyed the work. And at the moment, of course, you can find this. This is fully open source. It's hosted on GitHub. It has a lot of accessible and interactive elements. So, for example, it has quizzes. It has recommended activities. When you go through the course, you can obtain a certificate that you did this. And of course, all these templates, Ashi, our technical lead, made openly available. So if you want to develop your own course, she even provided you how to guide how to use these templates. So in the sense of open science, we share everything. And there were roughly 12 collaborators on this course. It changed over time. But some of us, we really enjoyed working together so much that we decided to start an open science community together. And we decided to name it Agape or Agape. But we didn't know where to start. And at that time, we actually got a recommended Open Seats, Open Life Science mentoring program. So this was 16-week-long program. And as Sarah mentioned, she was our mentor. We were her mentees. And during this mentoring program, we were able to formulate our thoughts. So we formulated our vision, roadmap, code of conduct created. But also a huge part of this was that we could interview some experts. And again, beautiful flashback. Anne was one of our one of the people we interviewed. And these interviews actually really helped us to understand where can be our position in the environment of all these open science communities and how the role of our community can change over time. So this was also really important for us to see. And of course, we felt very grateful. So since then, we worked in the role of reviewers, facilitators, mentors, and members of the OLS. And I think we are still trying to be active as much as time allows us. And what came out of these efforts was actually this community that I mentioned. So this is just a screenshot from our website. But the main idea, it is open, it is made for everyone, it's friendly, approachable. We are trying to make the open science realm also less scary for others to encounter. It's kind of a stepping stone to make your science open and transparent and reproducible. So that's one of our roles. And we work as an umbrella, and anyone who has any questions or has any projects and wants some help with them, we are here to help them. So since then, for example, we got some small funding. So we ran a series of workshops around Irish universities where it was amazing. It was focused mostly on open access publishing and open data, or if the crowd was very IT focused on open code. But we played with Lego to understand open data and documentation. It was a lot of fun. So we rather explore different pathways of how to make this approachable, like gamification. For example, another project was we developed a detective game that's named Science Sleuth, where you can reveal fraudulent papers and corrupted journals. So all this is part of it, and you can find all these resources under the QR code that is shown at the end. Uh, but we didn't know how many actually wonderful collaborations this will bring or seeds for future development. And about those, please, Ashi, take over.
Thank you, Nina. Hi, everyone. And thank you for your lovely presentation. It was really eloquent as Nina put it together. So, and Nina, thank you for taking the heavy part of the presentation. Uh, yes, so once we started working, I think Nina, myself, then two other prominent members, most active members of Agape, Yao and Cassie, we all met at in like early 2021, but I think it was actually intended for like a short collaboration for like maximum 6 or 7 months and go our own ways. But we stuck together because we keep on start saying yes to different interesting collaboration that doesn't have any kind of ring or rhyme, because all of these are like very individual projects and different tasks, different domains. Like there may be projects we have done in linguistics, then next day on a or next week on a biochemistry related work, or on a health psychology or social science, or even like inclusivity or accessibility related work. It's all over the place, let's just say that. But if we find something interesting, we share it and with each other, and most of the time one or two of us will say yes. And let's just say that we are not good for our work life balance. We are not good to each other. uh, we say that we will not say yes to any collaborations in forward, but next day we say yes to something else. Yeah, so now coming back to open life science, I think it provided it like OLS, that mentoring provided us and opened us to a lot of connections, networks, and even credibility to reach out to different open science collaborators and um, open science societies and initiatives. And we had like one, as a part of our mentorship program, we have had the opportunity to talk to several experts in the open science community on how to set up the community, how to get funding, how to build on big team science collaborations. So those kind of become fundamental for us moving forward. It also helped us to, you know, be develop our own collaborative and leadership ways, guided by the open leadership policies and guidelines, which I believe like what we learned through this collaboration is to have like a collaboration that in a emotionally matured, kind and supportive way, rather than being, all about go, 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 get your work done way, but rather it is like it's more sustainable way of being inclusive and kind and open and transparent. Uh, Now, coming back to our collaborations, uh, we have we very frequently work with Fort. They have several projects on replicability and on inclusivity, supporting the inclusivity, accessibility, uh, developing open source, open psychology and social science books. Nina and I have been part of several of those initiatives. And then we have also worked with Life Lab and pre-review on their initiatives on uh, making the research more accessible, transparent, and reproducible. Then we have worked with Tensing on making the credit statement and the feedback system more multilinguistic. Like primarily all these resources are available in English now. So we worked with them to translate into our own mother tongue. So uh, Slovakian and to Malayalam, my mother tongue. Then yeah, we occasionally dip into Turing Way and OLS also. We keep track of the change, what's happening in through Slack, and if we find something that is interesting, and it's always interesting, like when we have that time, we kind of like dip in and dip out. Like we come and do certain projects, then, but we always keep an eye to make sure that uh, to be part and to be updated on what's happening in the open life science community. Yes, and Nina worked on the NASA, one of those NASA initiatives as a reviewer. And we also started collaborating with several individual open science researchers across different domains. and most of them we have met through open life science community. The main one is Locia. She's a fantastic researcher in biomedical field at life science. And yeah, as somebody from a psychology, I have no business in that domain, but I do work with her on open science initiatives. And even Nina and myself, like she has interesting projects, and it's kind of like comes into a big team science umbrella, and that's where we are now kind of like focusing more on. And Nina, if you have anything else to add on.
No, I think that was perfect. But if anyone is just curious to check what we are working on or what we have done in the past, would like to find any templates to make their life and work easier, feel free just to use the link tree where you have all our resources, social media, everything linked. And as I think as she said, we will eventually get back to you. It just not might be today or tomorrow.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. That was a fantastic presentation. I mean, the work that you all have done is just amazing. I'm hoping that you realize, but like what you built is just too much, and I'm very glad that it is out there and it is getting used. Okay, so we do have a bit of time. I'm going to spotlight you all three, so you can all take the floor. So I'm going to first open the call for questions for people who are here already. If anyone wants to just raise their hand and just directly pop a question, feel free. I'm going to leave those uncomfortable 20 seconds for people to just in case. Cass, thank you so much.
I'm always here to fill the uncomfortable 20 seconds. So on the quote and the Rilke one, and I've put in the front pad that I've got a post-it note on my wall that says just keep bumbling along and doing the good stuff, because I know from like a similar path that it's about the journey and the things you learn, and sometimes you don't know how meaningful relationships or things are going to be until later in the day. But I was thinking about how do we communicate that to people, right? How do we say it's like, no, you've just got to trust the process, right? When so often culturally we're like intent on like the outcome, it's the journey, it's not the destination and things like that. I wonder if you thought about that at all.
That's such an interesting question. Because I think it's tied into like how do we create environments that feel safe to learn in? Like if you're being told like trust the process, but then every single time you make a mistake, you feel implicitly or explicitly that you've done something wrong, that means you're experiencing that cognitive dissonance. That's why like psychological safety, right, is so important, or like understanding when you're experiencing that kind of cognitive dissonance, whether it's I think we're all familiar with this in like the research space, right? Where like we know that deep thinking takes time, but then we have the paradigm or publish or perish. And that in and of itself is like an orienting paradigm of a huge cognitive dissonance, which means that people don't actually trust when you say take your time when it comes to something, right? So I think to tie it back into open seeds and really what I learned from the Turing Way community, and continue to learn really, is that you can't like saying that lesson, like, don't worry, it's about the process, not the outcome. Again, that will ring secondary to the feeling that a person has when they're in a space with you about whether or not they feel like they can make mistakes. And if those two things don't align, then you're not actually creating an environment that is safe to learn in and to make mistakes in, even if you say it is.
Yeah, so safety, and also kind of explicitly emphasize the value of that, that yes, you can make a mistake and mistakes are valuable and change is valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'd be curious. I would bounce the same question actually to Nina and Aswati about your experience as like a ESR, like early career researcher, ECR, like researchers that are organizing for other ECRs. How does that question resonate for you about like it's about the process, not the outcome, but like ECRs are told all the time that you got to keep certain outcomes in mind, that kind of thing.
So if I may start, Ashi, is it okay? Thank you, Anne, for the question. To be honest, I'm usually the only person chasing deadlines and everyone else, so they got used to it. But as you said, trust and safe space are the most important. So with that, everyone, I think, feel empowered. What we used to do, for example, we let everyone to work in what they felt comfortable. So I was kind of project managing as she was our technical lead. So from developing the course to developing the website through any other technical issues we might have had. Then we had a few people specializing in social media. We had a native speaker doing our editing and proofreading. But then we provided a space for everyone to learn other skills if they wanted and had someone to ask these things. So whilst everyone was able to enjoy their work because they felt they had already previous experience and they could deliver relatively easily what they were doing. Of course, don't take my word. It took weeks and a lot of sweat, but actually we delivered it. We also provided this safe space to develop further your skills, whatever you were interested in, to explore. And as you said, it's not a problem to fail. We are all there. We all fail. Just learn from it, and maybe next time try differently. Just don't keep trying the same thing. In a community sense, as you were talking about, it might be slightly different because there is another aspect, in my opinion, about the right timing. So if you are doing some community thing, maybe trying something later might actually work what didn't work before. But I like to see always these project management tasks and deliveries and everything and plan in my head towards them. So whilst I understand the deeper circle, you won't hear me talking about it. Yes, I will be just reminding deadlines. Okay, Ashi, your turn.
Yeah, I think Nina, you covered most of it. And I think it is also about, at least in my personal opinion, experience, it is about finding value in the process, not just in the outcomes. Because uh, we work with different, I love working with different kind of groups and healthy dynamics where, you learn like, uh, for example, when I work with Lucia, I understand like how she manages a huge team just through, just with the Excel sheet where she makes everything transparent. So it is, when you work with different people, you learn different styles and techniques from them. And it's not just about the output or excuse me. And Nina is really good at doing the management and being very open and straightforward about the communication. That's something I learned from her. So, and I try to do that in my own project. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much. I'm trying to capture all your wisdom in the notes. But yeah, I'm very grateful that this is being recorded. This is yeah, amazing. Amazing. Sayan, you have your hand raised and been very patient. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, my turn. So lovely to see so many familiar faces in this call. It's been ages, I believe. My question is, I think I'm gonna put it very straightforward. I sense personally also from the community, and there's a shift in the way the funding and the open source ecosystem is shifting towards. And I want to understand, does all of you also have similar instances or challenges that you're coming across? Are there any specific actions that has helped to overcome those, and how are you feeling about it in near future?
Such a good question. Such a difficult one. Oh man, what a bombshell of a question. An organization I just did this interview for, like their fiscal host, and they're now running a whole series of events about what happens when your project is closing down. Like, what do you do it's kind of like a guidance for not only the folks that they work with, whose funding may be shuttered, is also like, how do you deal with that when it comes to your community's governance? How do you deal with that when it comes to like project sustainability, all that kind of stuff? It's hard times. I mean, I can speak by my own personal experience on one hand. Like the Turing Way lost its institutional funding. And we knew this in advance, which is why we were able to take a number of steps that ultimately created a really interesting outcome, I think, and a very important one, which is like, how do you create a community that has been institutionally sustained? How does it become independent? And how does it become independent when you don't have like a community steward, paid community steward, kind of doing that sort of project management work that you were talking about, Nina, like all the boring maintenance bits that like keep stuff going. You know, what happens if you don't have that as paid support anymore? And so I've been through that process, and it's really challenging. And I think if you want to put a positive spin on it, you can also learn a lot from that process. And I think the way that I've dealt with it is probably to expand my scope. Like a lot of my mission in 2026 and throughout the second half of 2025 was really to learn, like, what are the other options for funding interesting and important work? Like, if I'm an ecosystems connector, if that's the role that I see myself playing, you know, there is so much money in the world. If I've ever learned anything from talking to folks in philanthropy, for example, it's that there's so much money, but it's concentrated in so few hands, or it passes in very particular ways. And I think the pathways that we've seen established for open source are closing, right, through certain philanthropic vehicles or private or donations, et cetera. But like, that means that there have to be other pathways paved, sorry. And I think being in these community networks, you also learn, and I don't know if any of this maybe should be recorded, maybe it should be. It should be, it's all good. Is that something I've learned from, you know, working with folks kind of in these ecosystems when they talk about, you know, putting in funding funding applications, not only for universities, but also for foundations, is that oftentimes the work of like those within the foundation that are advocating for that type of work is very long-term political work. So, for example, you might have one person who's a fan of open work that gets a role in an organization that approves funds that they advocate for open science as like a vehicle of work that should be advocated for. Like, through that singular role that has that institutional access, you have bodies of funding that become open to broader communities. And I think we haven't thought like strategically and tactically in that way. We do implicitly, I think, through interpersonal networks like OLS, but maybe to make that more explicit, to bring more people into these alternative spaces that can bring that kind of money over to support the type of grassroots work that really needs support right now. I don't know. I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around it and how I can support that type of work and what makes sense for the type of person that I am. But I really strongly feel like there must be other alternatives than kind of
Sure.
squeezing out what already exists.
Recorded, so no names, but whenever I talk to someone with high net individuals or investors or VCs, money is the system. It is always in the system. It flows, it doesn't, it's stagnant, but it never leaves the system. It recreates like energy. And often having visibility to these stagnant pots and where they reside and how to get it out is, I believe, is also a skill, and it comes with lots and lots of not just connection but getting it through that process again and again, and having a space to also discuss and understand. Eventually all of the communities are suffering due to the lack of finances, and as much as good we want to do, it takes a toll to not have that and have the ability to justify the efforts for a long time.
So true.
Nina, do you
Thanks.
have anything to add, or anyone in the room as well? I want to extend the discussion to everyone.
I might just briefly mention, so we can't really compare Agape to the Turing Way or OLS. We are a super tiny community. We are volunteering. We do this all on our free time, just because of our passion for this type of work. So pretty much we won some small awards like prize money, or when we got some funding, it was usually joining forces with some big names, and for some larger funding, for example, National Open Research Forum in Ireland. So they funded some projects. So we piggybacked on a few of them, which was very easy because we practically just needed a few thousand here, a few thousand there, mostly for materials and traveling expenses. And that was never an issue because we always delivered what we promised. So, yeah, we can't really compare with this. We never aimed higher just because we all have our different alternative careers. So, it may be for you only to see that there are different ways how you can do this. You can either dedicate your whole life, your career, and everything you can, or you can just try to make your living in another way and do this because of the pure passion.
Good. Thanks for sharing, Nina.
I'm going to extend again because, as Anne has said, I think there's a lot of expertise about this in the room. Does anyone else want to share their views or their experiences? No. Okay, if not, I'm not going to wait 20 seconds because we do have more questions coming. Again, I'm going to open the floor for for folks who are already here. Does anyone have any other question that they want to raise themselves? While you're thinking, there is a question for Nina and Swati. Well, she had to leave. So for Nina, is there anything that you would have done differently in founding Agape, especially post early years of the COVID lockdowns?
So I'll start with the personal view. So the way how it felt for us, who were developing the community, the course, and everything. For us, I guess the lockdown was a bit of bliss because we had too much time on our hands where we couldn't go anywhere. So we were just sitting at home and we were really happy to find something that we felt was meaningful. Maybe we would seek some more advice and ways how to communicate it to a broader community. So we had our two social media experts, but sometimes they were very efficient, sometimes they were not. And we learned that, for example, when we were doing these workshops at different universities, that they were always the most efficient channels were actually administrators of individual schools reaching the students. So whatever other levels we found, for one workshop, I sent usually around 150 emails. And then it really depended on those administrators, how many students enrolled in this workshop. So that was really, really good experience. So the communication maybe would be something that we would do different as a community. But otherwise, I think we felt very happy with what we did, how we did it. And I think during the whole time, we just enjoyed that process, working together and what we were doing. And that's why it never felt like stressful, heavy, or something like redundant. I don't know. I think we found the perfect balance that worked for us. Of course, we understand it's not for everyone. Thank you. What about you, Anne?
I love that. I feel like my story would be a lot more negative in the sense that I feel like after COVID gave me, I think opportunities that I feel like I have to recognize would not be possible otherwise. Like I was able to give talks in conferences that I wouldn't be able to attend in person till many years later. Like CSV Conf, for example, or RightsCon, and all of these spaces where I wouldn't have been able to go. So I have no doubt that like there was this fact that we had this like really tragic equalizer that brought us all online. I remember being in a Zoom call with um, a really famous writer, and it was like before people mastered Zoom, and she was just another square, and I was like, "This is crazy." But the reason why I bring that up is because, like, I think because I was so excited and so interested and involved with so many initiatives, I think when the lockdowns started to release themselves, I maintained that same pace of work that I started during the pandemic and like almost accelerated. I feel like I did more and more and more and more, and then went through some cycles of burnout because of it. Because it's almost like in that post like early periods of lockdown, we almost like accelerated into what we thought was back, quote unquote, back to normal when actually everyone um we yeah, people wanted to revert to how things were before, but also so many projects and initiatives had changed the status quo. And I feel like I was a part of that sort of acceleration, not really knowing how to integrate all of these things I'd learned during that time. And so I'm happy to hear your story because I feel like I probably didn't have the ability to really like process or understand. Um, and I was expecting that processing to happen a lot quicker than it actually took, which is why I think so much of my presentation focused on like things take time. Like it's okay for how long it takes. Yeah.
Yeah, that is it's good to have the two different experiences, isn't it? Because you never know what's going to be valuable and what's not. Sometimes you just have to look at it in hindsight. Sometimes it's just so clear when you're doing it. So yeah, it's great reminders. Okay, so I do have a last question for Anne. Very straightforward. Would you have signed up to OLS if it wasn't for Malvika? Why yes, why not?
I
I feel
love
like
this
this comes,
question.
yeah, I feel like this comes from
I
someone
love
who
it.
knows you.
I love this question. Um, at the time, probably not. Like I was brought in, I didn't know anything about governance. I didn't know anything. I was an outsider to the Turing Way. I was an outsider to open science. I didn't consider myself a scientist. I still don't consider myself a scientist. But I was like, I think all of those perceived barriers meant that I think I would have been really hesitant to jump in. And it's funny how all of those things have become like huge factors in like my ecosystem of thought and way of doing things. Like governance was a huge part of my work when I was at the Turing. And open science and the community elements of that like dominate how open science communities that I'm a part of are like operate have become like my operating norms in every other community that I'm a part of. Um, yeah, so I actually wouldn't have had it any other way. Like if I had stayed with my, maybe that's the power of community, is that sometimes you're like tossed in the deep end whether you like it or not, and it's good and it's ultimately good. There was so much learning that happened during that process, and I was looking through some of the notes, kind of reflecting for this call, and I was just like, man, like I really it was a huge uphill battle. And I was bumbling along, as Cass was saying. But you know what? I bumbled along and I kept bumbling and we're still bumbling. But I think the path of a bumblebee is a fun one.
Such a great one. That's it. No regrets. That's the way to go. Okay, so I think we're almost past to the time. I'm just going to leave another 10 uncomfortable seconds for any last minute thoughts, questions. I must say this has been so much fun and so inspirational. Thank you all for coming. But yeah, I'm going just to open the floor one last time, just in case. That's okay. Again, thank you all so much for coming. As you know, so next week our series won't be on the Tuesday, but the Monday. But the coming weeks, it will be always on a Tuesday. I'll send you all reminders, and I hope to see you again next week. But again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Anne. Amazing projects and amazing to hear from you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much,
Bye
Sarah.
bye. Thank
Fantastic
you all.
presentation,
Mhm.
Bye,
Love for
folks.
everyone. Bye bye.